Water is already scarce in very many parts of the world, and both of the initial speakers, Margareta and Georg, have referred to natural resources more broadly, and in particular to water. The problem is that some of the technologies and some of the policies that are being put in place at the moment are wasting billions of taxpayers' money by fostering certain technologies that may at best have a very marginal positive impact on greenhouse gases, but if you make an overall environmental impact assessment, have devastating impacts on other environmental resources, in particular on water. And the best example here, obviously, is what some people call biofuel. I think it would be more appropriate to call it agri-fuel, where you, especially the first generation, we're misusing food crops like corn, like oilseeds, to turn them into fuels for cars, for transportation at the moment, by overusing water resources that will actually be missing for helping to feed future generations. So what we are particularly expecting from the process now in Cancun is that finally the world is not just single-mindedly focusing on carbon and on climate change, but it's finally acknowledging the interconnectivities between all the other natural resource challenges. Deforestation obviously is one, water is one, and certainly we would also expect that some clear rules, some clear standards are being set for criteria on biofuels in order to end that complete nonsensical development where we're squandering the world's water resources just to make biofuels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus. And I have to say thank you to the panel. I think you've probably cheered us all up greatly. Particularly anyone who has sat through a long UNFCCC meeting, I would recommend sitting with a group of forward-looking business leaders like this as a way to get your optimism back, that both a lot is being done and a lot can be done. I'd like to pick up on a remark that Rachel made in her introduction. She noted that a few regulatory moves here and there, a feed-in tariff in a particular country, a renewable portfolio standard, an energy efficiency standard, that these things can be quite transformative and have big ripple effects, opening up markets, bringing in investment, creating political momentum. And I'd like to ask the panel, are there such specific moves that you would like to see? Specific regulatory actions that would really open up the markets for you? And then what could Cancun do to help accelerate that process? Anyone like to volunteer to take that on? Rachel?
I'll add one example. What we hear as an investor a lot of times is, look, the cost of capital to make the transformation to a cleaner production process, to a more energy efficient process. First of all, there is a cost, and there's some time before that cost is recouped. And there's nothing out there in the market in which I'm working that encourages me or helps me to do that. And I think that whether it's in Central Asia or in parts of South Asia, Southeast Asia, across Africa, parts of Latin America, the investment climate and the business enabling environment is not conducive to getting companies to do now what they probably know they need to do, and to speed this process up. So I think that energy efficiency standards by sector, but then creating the environment and also creating some kind of pooled capital so that you can move now to become more cost efficient and buy that capital equipment, buy that user capital for that equipment now. You'll see the benefit accrues to the country, to the climate. So I think that there's a lot of it's just sort of bunged up at the moment, that's a technical term. But I think that there's massive gains to be had. I mean, we were talking to a company in Central Asia, unnamed country, where the move to combined heat and power could probably have more impact on that region's entire GHG emissions profile than anything else that could be done. And I think that that's the kind of move that the international community has to support countries who are locked into coal, who are locked into reasonably dirty processes for the next 20 to 30 years, but even within that context could actually shift quite quickly if the environment was there. When you come back to me, we'll talk about trade wars, which I think are going to start having an impact on some of that.
That's it. It will be a good topic to come back to. Klaus?
Well, let me just add to that from a company's practitioner. I mean, we spend about $5 billion every year in investments, in building new factories, new distribution centers, and so on. Of this, it's about between 200 and 300 million that are dedicated to environmental technologies or investments, in particular also those that have an impact on energy saving and on carbon reduction consequently. What I still see as a big problem in competing for these internal funds, it's not the lack of finance. I mean, Nestle, even last year, during the worst kind of financing crisis, we were able to borrow at below LIBOR in Europe. So it's not the availability of money. It is just a competition that what we see every single day, that there are a lot of projects, energy-saving projects that would make a lot of sense to probably most of us as individuals with a very decent payback, but they are competing against other, even more attractive investment proposals. And that is because energy is still, globally speaking, too cheap. And while the cost of carbon and other resources, like water, for example, also water doesn't really carry the price of the actual societal cost that it really bears. So we really need to get these price signal right, and that in itself will already trigger then a lot of investments that are currently in the pipeline but are simply not yet implemented.
I want to bring Daniel on this, but I want to pick up also on one comment that Klaus made. Maybe you can address this in your remark, that energy is too cheap. Do we think that will still be the case? And if it isn't, how will that affect everything that we're talking about?
So you want me to answer your question or the one?
You can pick up on the first question.
Okay. Well, I'm just on a practical thing to do that. I am starting to see here in Mexico, maybe in the developed world, that's already a thing that it's second nature, but it's only beginning in Mexico. It's a sustainability index that it's being asked on the stock exchange that all companies must report to. And this is something new, and it's starting here in Mexico in the coming months. And even though it's sort of going to be the first stage, it's going to send a lot of waves in the private sector. So I do believe that if in all countries the public stock exchange do require that index, we will have an impact because nobody wants to be at the bottom of the list. So that will make a big dent. And on the second issue, I do believe that certainly there's a lot of improvement in that regard. And Mexico can do much more so. Fuel, we do business in 17 countries, and with the exception of one, which is Venezuela, the second country who has the cheapest fuel price so far is Mexico. We're increasing it for the past year or 8 months, but it's still low in its price. So the higher the price of the water, the higher the price of the fuel, the more responsible business will be in its practices.
Well, I may ask Arunago to comment on this because it's been a big issue in India. I know many countries around the world unwinding the subsidies for fossil fuels. The G20 last year pledged to end fossil fuel subsidies, but only limited progress has been made. Would that be even, far beyond what could be achieved in Cancun? Would progress in reducing subsidies for the fossil fuel economy make a big difference, say, to Tata's efforts in these areas?
Well, first, of course, I think a panelist here said that the energy is cheap. I think from the Indian perspective, I don't think we don't see it cheap. We have always switched off lights when we went from one room to another. So there is a slight difference in perspective there. And yes, we need energy for our different units. So, and again, we've been frugal in the past. Like, for example, our steel company, we have been capturing the waste heat and energy to the extent that now we do not buy any liquid fuels. And I think, coming to the very contentious issue of removing subsidies on fossil fuels, increasingly, if you see the government perspective, there was a committee set up to look at fuel pricing, and they were looking for removal of subsidies, so that again it gives a clear signal to the users to not to misuse resource. For example, diesel is subsidized in India, and that is essentially meant for the poorer segments of the society. But in reality, it is used by the richest segments who drive Mercedes and BMWs. So yeah, it is a contentious issue, but I think now the more and more the government is sort of getting ready to face the flak and go ahead with it.
There will be a lot of flak, I'm sure.
Yes.
Barbara, I'd like to pick up on something you said in your remarks, that there's a green race going on. Who's winning? Who's losing?
I think maybe that's less the question. I think more important is that there is this green race, because this green race actually will help our planet to become greener. Because wherever there is competition, wherever there is a race going on, more will happen. So I think that's a very good thing. Certainly China has taken up the green race, very much so, and I'm sure in their next 5-year plan, which will come out quite soon again, environment will play an important role. China is investing every year about 20 billion in clean technologies, and is also building up companies that will compete globally in that space. So that is key, but there are certainly other countries that are doing that. But looking just at some statistics, between 2005 and 2009, investments in clean technologies has increased by 230%. So that's a very great number. And the second statistic I found interesting is that every quarter the G20 members in the last 2 years invested $32 billion in energy, and of course most of it environmentally friendly. So this green race also has a very, very positive effect. And I think the more it happens, the more competition and sort of free market there is, the more also, of course, it will help the rollout. Nevertheless, I come back to kind of the treaties. I also think small steps can help, if the big step is not there yet, but small steps certainly can help. And what you said about the transparency is absolutely important. I was attending 2 weeks ago the kind of event in New York by the Carbon Disclosure Project, and I was quite pleased because Siemens was selected as the leading company, the sort of highest performance in this area. But certainly it means that more and more companies need to be transparent on different factors, not just on the financials. The financials are clearly backward-looking KPIs. Sustainability is much more a forward-looking kind of a scheme. And I think the more companies are part of this and open up and have to be transparent, not just on financial figures, but on environment, on social issues, on the CO2 footprint of Nescafé and others, I think the more there will be also competition going on within the companies, because our customers, they want to work with the best and they want to work with sustainable partners.